All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you and welcome. Good afternoon. I'm excited that you've decided to join us today for the next edition in our webinar series. Financial innovation is at the heart of the Green Bank model and the Green Bank approach to transforming markets. We're focused on finding new ways to open up markets, to crowd in private capital, increase transparency, and thus reduce costs and further the deployment of clean energy. So today's conversation will focus on financial innovation with regard specifically to impact investing, and I want to highlight some interesting things going on in the impact investing space, particularly a couple that are coming out of Connecticut. And these are things that really are helping to bring others into the fold and really help build an inclusive space. Impact investing since the millennium has seen a notable increase in demand for ways to make people's money go and align with their values, to go further, to not just have a financial return, but to have a societal benefit as well. In terms of stocks, we've seen the launch of socially responsible investment funds, such as Generation Investment Management, and that's gone mainstream. And now there are 130 plus socially responsible ETFs with close to $90 billion under management. In terms of the bond market, since 2007, with the launch of the first green bond, we've seen that grow to an annual issuance of $270 billion in 2020, which is a massive increase year on year since the market really launched. There are new types of bonds, new classifications, new certifications, and that grows every year. The developments that we're going to focus on today are really those that are helping to create transparency and create accessibility in the market. So today I'm joined by a really esteemed panel, and I want to thank you all for joining, for letting me rope you into this. So on our panel, we have Monica Reid. Monica is the CEO and founder of Kestrel ESG. Her current focus is on supporting the growth of Kestrel as a provider of green bond services and ESG data. The firm has a particular emphasis on public finance, leveraging unique insights and relationships, and project-level understanding. Ms. Reid has 20 years of experience as a principal consultant and thought leader in the field of innovative finance for infrastructure and sustainability efforts, and she's currently serving on the California Green Bonds Market Development Committee, which is convened by the State Treasurer of California. Prior to Kestrel ESG, Monica founded Kestrel Consulting, which provided strategic consulting and grant and loan services to local government through 2019. She was a trusted advisor and led the company's successful efforts, which included securing $600 million in competitive state and federal grants and loans for infrastructure and sustainability projects. Prior to that, she was with the U.S. Forest Service as a public affairs specialist, and she has the fortune to live in Hood River, Oregon, which I hear is a wonderful place. We have Matt Moroney from Reid Green. He's the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Reid Green, which makes it easier for anyone to invest in solar energy and climate solutions. He is an environmental chemist and data scientist with over 10 years experience in remediation, permitting, and sustainability strategy. He received his bachelor's in science and environmental science from Washington State University and a master's of environmental management from Yale. And finally, we have Abe Solorio, who is the community outreach manager for Sustainable Connecticut, where he manages the organization's innovative crowd granting program, the Community Match Fund. Since launching the Match Fund in late 2019, Abe and Sustainable CT have partnered with local stakeholders throughout Connecticut to support over 120 community-led sustainability projects in more than 60 cities and towns statewide, leading to an investment of over $1.2 million. So welcome, everybody. In terms of format, I'm just going to pass this over to Monica to kick us off and talk about the exciting things that she has going on at Kestrel.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. We're talking about green finance today, and so our company, Kestrel Verifiers, we've been working with Connecticut Green Bank since really the end of about 2018 to start to develop the Green Bank's green bond program. And our company has verified all of their bonds, including the Shrek Liberty bonds. And so what I wanted to do in my part of the presentation was just kind of give a little introduction to green bonds and how green bonds can be used as an innovative tool for finance, and just kind of go through some of the specifics just to give everyone kind of a lay of the land on that. So Eric, how do I advance the slides, or do you advance them for me?
I can advance them.
Okay, so maybe we could just go through to the intro slide.
There we go.
Perfect. So just a quick intro on our company. Eric covered a lot of it, but Kestrel Verifiers is we verify green bonds, climate bonds, sustainability bonds, social bonds, and as Eric mentioned in the introduction, I started the company in 2000 as Kestrel Consulting and really work closely with state and local governments and bring that kind of experience of working with government and understanding the public realm, and sort of marry that with the work on green bonds. Our company is a Climate Bonds Initiative approved verifier. That means that we are accredited by the Climate Bonds Initiative, which is an international nonprofit, to actually identify when investments are aligned with the climate bonds criteria. And I'll explain that in just a moment. We work on municipal bonds, corporate bonds, and in international markets. I think next week we'll hit $7 billion par in green, social, and sustainability climate bonds that we've verified, and really see ourselves as public finance specialists. So we'll go to the next slide. So what are green bonds? I'm just gonna start basic. So green is like it's a label that's applied to the bond, so that investors know what they're looking at. And putting a green bond together, lots of different ways you can do it. Like the Liberty bonds, this is one of the most creative things we saw. But typically they're just like conventional bonds in how they're put together and how they're sold and how they're repaid. But the proceeds on a green bond are used for projects and programs that have an environmental benefit. And there's some interpretation there. And when I show you the standards, we'll go into that a little bit. So it's best practice to use an independent verifier or external reviewer. That's what our company does. But in the United States, some agencies do self-certify their own green bonds. So Eric, can you hit the next slide, please? So there are two main standards that are used for green, and they're highlighted here in these black boxes. So the most common standard for green is called the Green Bond Principles, and it's established by the International Capital Market Association. And it's very broad because the Green Bond Principles are written in such a way that they have to cover all kinds of debt all over the world. So it's not something that's specific for the US. So the US muni bonds, the United States public finance, it's very idiosyncratic, right? There's all kinds of little twists and turns in how US municipal bonds are put together. So that when I say we're public finance specialists, I mean we're interpreting these. But the green bond, these principles for the muni market, the green bond principles basically look at what is the eligible green project, how was the project evaluated and selected for financing, how will the proceeds be managed, and how will the and there's some reporting. And then what you do with that is you have a second party opinion. That's the kind of the standalone external review that says this bond meets these principles. The other standard that's very common for green bonds is called the climate bond standard. And that's what Connecticut Green Bank has used for the Shrek bonds. And the climate bond standard is, it's set by the Climate Bonds Initiative, which is an international nonprofit. And activities that are climate bonds are shown to be aligned with the goals and targets of the Paris Accord and hold the world to help hold the world to under 2 degrees warming. So there are actual numeric goals and targets. It's a much more robust type of green bond review. So those are the 2 main standards that we use. If you're talking about a green bond, you would want to go, what standard did they use? Green bond principles or climate bond standard are the most common one. So next slide, Eric. So why would folks use green bonds? There's lots of different reasons. One of the main ones is really to attract new investors. So investors who are impact investors who are looking for putting their money in good places, as I suspect many people on in this webinar are. The green bond label is a good way to get people's attention. And the quality green bonds are in high demand. We debrief on every job that we do with the finance teams to learn how the sales went. And they are almost all reporting that new investors are showing up and there was great demand. Their bonds were oversubscribed. There is a potential pricing benefit. So one of the best pricing benefit stories is from the city of Boston. City of Boston did a great, they showed some great leadership, and for this, they just won the environmental finance, one of the environmental finance awards for their deal that they brought to the market in December. But basically, the city of Boston offered a twin bond. They had a non-green bond and a green bond that were very similar, same coupon, same terms, same credits, same issuer, same day. Issued those in the market, and the green bond had a 3 basis point pricing benefit. That's one of the clearest signals, that is the clearest signal we've ever had in the US market, but it's really hard to compare apples to apples. You need somebody to do that kind of experiment. So kudos to the city of Boston for doing that for all of us. But that's not. I think if there were good data like that available, we would see more documentation of the pricing benefit. Another reason that people use green bonds is to showcase environmental leadership. Improve transparency with investors and stakeholders, because the second party opinion really helps tell the story of the environmental benefit of what's being financed. And also to support multiple objectives. So like Connecticut Green Bank and the state of Connecticut, they have all sorts of other plans for climate action, sustainability, carbon neutrality. There are cities that have that have signed on to the Climate Mayors Coalition. So using green bonds is a way to sort of reinforce your commitment to those other objectives. And I think there's one more slide, Eric. Is that right?
We've got a couple more.
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. The green bonds can be used in all different categories. These were some of the ones that really intersected with the Connecticut Green Bank. Energy, buildings, potentially moving into water or stormwater management, waste to energy types of projects. Any of these would work really well for green bond application. And the next slide. And I just wanted to say, Connecticut Green Bank, in my mind, they were our first client. They were our first client for, they were the first, Eric and team, they were the first ones to hire us for verifying green bonds. And we're always grateful for that opportunity and that early support. And since then, the Green Bank's gone on to win all kinds of awards for their innovation in green finance. So we're proud to be a part of that process. So when I talk to my other clients, I want them to be a best-in-class issuer like Connecticut Green Bank. So these are some of the things that make a best-in-class issuer for green bonds. And I know we have a variety of people on the call. Some of you are potential issuers and some of you are potential investors, but these are some of the things that are important to keep in mind when you're looking at a green bond, looking for transparency and a really clear description of what is being done and what's being financed and a budget to go along with that. You're looking to see the alignment with other adopted plans, maybe a climate action plan or sustainability plan. You're looking for some reporting where there's some information that will come back to the investors on potential beneficial impacts and some non-financial data. And then lastly, to have an external review or some sort of independent verification. And I would encourage, if you're an issuer on this webinar, I would encourage you to stick to the accepted standards. We still have a few issuers out there who try to make up their own green bond principles and their own green bond standards. Don't do that. Stick to the accepted standards. So that's all I have. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Monica. Sure that there will be some questions for you later on, but why don't we move on now to Matt and Raise Green.
Great. Thank you, Eric. First off, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. The story of Raise Green really, began in Connecticut, and we're really excited as well to be here with Monica and Abe, both of which we've been trying to work together for some time. So it's really nice to be sitting on a panel together. Starting with the story of how Raise Green began, we started the company when we were at the Yale School of what is now called the Yale School of Environment. And my co-founder, Franz, worked in the Obama administration for 9 years, and ultimately at the State Department, working on the Paris Agreement. I had been working in remediation and saw brownfields as a really nice opportunity to do redevelopment for renewable energy projects. But ultimately, what we realized is there just wasn't enough capital going into these projects fast enough. That solutions weren't scaling at the pace of the problem. And so what we did was we created a company called New Haven Community Solar, which used equity crowdfunding to raise almost $100,000 and build 2 solar arrays in New Haven for Columbus House, which is dedicated to homelessness services in the southern Connecticut area. And what we realized was it was a very specific recipe to create a project like this. And if you look back on the most successful business model in the 20th century, I think of it as McDonald's, because it's just ubiquitous globally. You don't need a college education to open a McDonald's, and you can become a millionaire, and you can have a very positive impact on your local community. You can hire people, and you can create local economic development. Environmental benefits aside, that's a different conversation. So we started to think, could we turn New Haven Community Solar into a franchise? And that's where we kind of came up with this idea of Raise Green as a whole, which is instead of developing individual projects, we wanted to empower people with the access to the legal documents and the financial tools in order to actually create their own local solar projects. We tongue-in-cheek call this the new sustainable side hustle. Could this be the equivalent of flipping houses now? We hope so. So on the highest level, Raise Green makes it easy for anyone to invest in solar energy and climate. We're US-based, and we're licensed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, what's called a crowdfunding intermediary portal under the Securities Act. You can think of it almost as a broker-dealer light. We don't hold securities, we don't hold cash, but we are licensed to sell equity or debt into private companies. People can put $100, people can put $100,000, or philanthropies or institutions can put up to $5 million into projects like clean energy on our site. Think solar on a local school, an urban farm, electric vehicle charging, or energy efficiency projects. The individual raises are limited to $5 million, under regulation crowdfunding, but they can't fit into pieces of larger capital stack for developers that want to integrate access to retail investors. So when you talk about blended capital on an institutional level, what does that actually mean? Well, you can, on regulation crowdfunding, you can have retail investors, accredited investors, institutional investors, and philanthropies all putting in capital, getting the same security on the same terms. And that's what we're really proud of, is the access to capital formation and the access to knowledge equity from some of our templates. We can't say we're the first U.S. platform based on impact investing in ESG because FINRA advertising regulations prevents claims like this, but we are one of the only ones that's focused on this. And we built software for this rapid project creation. So, McDonald's franchise for solar, but we're already thinking about other types of asset classes. So when you look at, New Haven Community Solar, we have this template in our system. If someone wants to make a copy of New Haven Community Solar and call it something different and fundraise on our platform, all of those documents are accessible. Power purchase agreements, tax equity flip documents, which are incredibly expensive. If there's any solar developers on the line, it's quite complicated. We offer those for free for anyone who actually wants to list on our platform. We've been in business for 3 years and officially opened the marketplace last July. And just actually this weekend, we crossed the $1 million of total securities sold on our platform into 6 different offerings. There's actually 400 investors now. We have approximately 100 megawatts of solar in the pipeline and a variety of other projects, anaerobic digestion, energy efficiency, microgrids, EV charging, growing subscriber list, and an average investment size of $2,700. Although, like I said, we've seen as small as $100 and as high as $50,000. On our marketplace, we bring together investors and developers. Right now, we're targeting more experienced project developers, folks that want to set their own terms. They get to choose which terms they offer to the crowd. Of course, we have somewhat of a threshold that we use, but there is some interest there in terms of making it flexible to the developer's need for financing in terms of duration and coupon rate. And they may just want to enable community involvement. It can assist building public support, which could help it move through the permitting process faster. The investors that we see on our platform are alarmed about climate change. They want verifiable impact, to Monica's point, and they want to choose which project they invest in. We take a 5% stake in each project, although with larger clients, we're negotiating kind of longer term fees. Last year, we're growing pretty fast, and it's really exciting to see an uptake like that. We're already looking at templates and other asset classes, and just very excited to think about how we can blend, this type of public-private capital of different sizes with everyone getting the same terms, bring in folks like Abe and some grant making into the stack to help projects move forward faster that perhaps otherwise wouldn't. We also do development capital. So if developers are struggling to get $50,000 or $100,000 to do their interconnection studies, we are talking to a variety of folks on that, albeit much different risk profile than an already generating asset. And we're also, of course, talking with Monica, trying to get these small projects certified as green bonds, because there's just such an overwhelming demand for these types of investments at the institutional scale, but there's such a dearth of deal flow. And we think that, out of the 10,000 cities and towns in the United States, there are at least 10, if not 100 or 1,000 of these types of projects that need to be built in the next 10 years. We want to hit any of the science-based targets and stay well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So again, thank you, Eric, and just delighted to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. So that takes us to Abe and Sustainable CT. Abe, you want to tell us what's going on there and a little bit about the match fund?
Sure thing. Thanks, Eric. And hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. Great to be on this panel. I'm learning a lot today, so this is also fun and informational for me. As Eric said before, I manage our crowd granting program, the Community Match Fund, which is providing people an opportunity to to lead and invest in hyper-local sustainability initiatives. So one very important thing to clarify that will be different from what you've heard from both Monica and Matt is that unlike the programs that they're talking about, the investment that folks make in our projects, it doesn't have a financial return. I think you could certainly say that there's a return in terms of social capital, community cohesion, benefits, resiliency, but they're investing in their communities. So the projects that we support aren't investments that you make money on, although I do think they are worthwhile investments, certainly. So today I'm going to talk mostly about the Match Fund program, its mechanics, as well as the results that we've seen over the past year and a half. But before getting into that, I want to give a quick overview of Sustainable CT, which I think will help provide sort of the background and the context for why we arrived at creating this program, as well as sort of what its impact has been. Eric, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So on a whole, we run a municipal sustainability program that promotes and supports cities and towns, as well as residents and communities in taking action on wide-ranging sustainability initiatives. So we provide a framework of actions that municipalities can choose from. They decide what they want to do. They reach out to us for different resources and support as they then implement the plans, the actions, the projects, whatever that looks like. It depends on the action. So municipalities can earn points for each action that they complete. And if they've earned enough points, they can apply for certification at various levels. So that's a very high level overview of that. And looking at this next slide, you can see that it's actually 120 now. So a new town just joined. Kent registered, I think, yesterday or the day before, so welcome. But 70% of the municipalities in the state are participating. And I think this covers about 85% of the state's population. So pretty robust engagement and participation. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Eric. So again, before getting into the mechanics of the Match Fund, I want to explain what brought us to creating this program. Like you saw on the last slide, our certification program has been widely implemented. There's robust engagement from cities and towns around the state. There are lots of aspects of it that aren't really relevant to your average resident, right? The average person who maybe wants to do something good, but well, we may know that at towns, their permitting requirements, their zoning regs, siting, whatever else, those are crucially important to promoting and supporting sustainability actions, like deploying solar as one example. But most people aren't lining up to attend a zoning meeting or a plan of conservation and development. And even if they were, there's not a lot there for them to do, right? They could show up, but they don't have expertise in that. They may not have interest in it. And again, it's municipally oriented. So there's not much that your resident can actually do there to move the needle. So we began to look for better ways to engage communities and residents in our work where they would still do things that were related to what Sustainable CT does, but where they could actually lead and they could focus on things that were of interest to them and then do that through a program that would also be accessible to them. Because the other side of this is that even if folks have something that they want to do, they have to have access to funding and resources in order to actually go out there and do it. So where we landed on that is the Community Match Fund, which is a hybrid funding program that leverages institutional funding, which comes from Sustainable CT and our funders, alongside community crowdfunding to support really hyper-local projects and to get them this funding and to support these projects in a really quick time frame. Eric, if we go to the next slide, I can explain a little bit about the actual mechanics of this. So through the Match Fund, we provide a dollar-for-dollar match for public sustainability projects. It really is fairly wide-ranging, as you can see from the slide, or not the slide, excuse me, the examples of what we fund. It's pretty broad. It's anything that aligns with our broad framework of sustainability actions, which encompasses all sorts of different things: local economies, housing, energy efficiency, transportation, food systems, equity. It's a broad view of sustainability that we take. So we'll grant up to $15,000 as a match for energy-related projects. So anything that's energy efficiency, deals with renewables, and then we have a lower $7,500 match for projects that align with any other broad aspect of our program. So essentially, we're covering 50% of the project's costs, and project leaders raise the other 50%. None of that is terribly innovative or different from what anybody else does. I'm sure we're all familiar with matching grant programs. So the most unusual aspect of this is that we don't match municipal, state, federal, or what we sort of broadly term other institutional or major funding. Rather, everyone who has a project that's approved for the Match Fund, they run a public crowdfunding campaign to raise the other 50% of their budgets. So basically, they're engaging their community and reaching out to their friends, their families, their neighbors, folks in surrounding towns, realistically, wherever they have a network and folks who might want to support this, but to say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Are you interested in this? Do you want to contribute to making it possible? So we partner with a crowdfunding platform. I am not a crowdfunding expert. Nobody else at Sustainable CT is. So Patronicity is a civic-based crowdfunding platform that has similar programs to this, although different in scope and the type of work that they're supporting, but similar to crowd granting in other states and at state level with quasi-public agencies. So everybody who has an approved project, they put together a public-facing description of that. They develop a fundraising strategy by working with Patronicity, and then they launch this campaign to the public to say, here's what I'm doing. Would you like to contribute to this? Do you want to learn about it? Once they raise the other half of their funds, that essentially unlocks the matching grant from Sustainable CT. So the model for this, what we like about it is, one, that communities are effectively voting with their dollars on the types of projects that they want to see happen there. So unlike a traditional funding program, we're not choosing what gets funded. We don't look at these projects, score them, decide, okay, we like this, we don't like this. Rather, as long as a project meets a broad objective eligibility criteria, it's inherently eligible. Our role, my role really, is just to look at it and say, does it meet those boxes? If it does, then we put it out to community and we say, hey, you guys live here, you work here, you know what your community needs, you know what it can benefit from and what you want to see, and then residents are getting to choose on it. So it's, in a way anyways, it's democratizing philanthropy to let people who know what their community needs decide what their community should have, rather than having projects done to them or for them. But then the other side of this is, one, it's great to give something that's accessible for people to act and to donate, but they also need to be able to lead on these issues as well, right? Donating is great, you get involved, you get invested, but leading a project and participating in this and actually taking the initiative is the other side. So on that end of things, we've removed many of the traditional barriers to accessing funding, in that there's no grant application to submit. There are no deadlines. It's a rolling basis. As long as we have funding, you propose your project. If it's eligible, we turn it around essentially immediately, and folks can work with Patronicity to launch their crowdfunding campaign. The funding is first come, first served, and it's non-competitive. So we're not receiving a bunch of applications, like I said, deciding which ones we like and then choosing what to fund. Rather, it meets the criteria, you've proposed it, you're ready to go. We say yes, and you move you out the door to working with Patronicity. And then one of the biggest barriers for folks is if you don't have 501c3 status, or if you're not a tax exempt municipal or government entity, lots of folks they simply can't or won't grant to you. So we've removed the need for a 501c3 requirement. We can grant to informal groups, to individuals. So it really is basically, the way we're looking at this is, it's the project that determines eligibility, and the person has nothing to do with it. Anyone can lead this project. We can grant to somebody's personal bank account, they receive the money, they go out there and do the work, we sign the award agreement with them. So there's two sides of this, right? One is empowering people who have an idea and want to lead on something to do that and to move to the next step. And then the other is letting residents then decide what they want to see in their communities. So if we go into the next slide, I think I've got some pretty high level stats on what the results have been for this so far. Yeah, so some of these, Eric, you mentioned these before, but obviously the match fund is always moving. It's constantly moving forward, and the spring has predictably been very busy. So we now have 137 projects in more than 60 cities and towns in Connecticut. There's probably about another 15 projects, maybe it's actually 20 that are in the pipeline and going to launch soon. So as things stand right now, there's, between crowdfunding and the match from Sustainable CT's pool, there's over 1.5 million that's been invested. And once many of the projects that are still live hit their goals, that will probably look more like $2 million. I think as of this morning, we're at like 5,450 donors to all of these projects. So again, it's a lot of, this is small scale, where Matt was talking about much larger scale investment, which is still crowdfunding, though ours is sort of like on the hyper local, smaller scale of this. You'll see the average project budget is about 13,000, meaning you crowdfund 6,500, we match 6,500. There's 40 donors per project. And then I think the number that's most meaningful here is that $50 median donation. So these projects, they really are largely being funded by small scale individual contributions. It's not that there's a couple of $1,000 donations that come into each of these projects and fund them. And rather it's just people giving really manageable amounts. I think the mode in terms of donations, the number that we see the most of is 20 bucks. So, but under $50 is by far the vast majority of the contributions to these projects. Next slide, please, Eric. So this slide just shows an example of where the projects have taken place, so the different cities and towns in Connecticut. On the right-hand side, you'll see some of the towns have parentheses, and I think this is one of the things that's cool. Any town that has a number next to it means that's the number of projects that have happened there. So if you're eagle-eyed, I think you'll see Hartford has like 25 projects. New Haven has somewhere around 22. So a couple of big actors who have led tons of projects, robust engagement. But there's been a ripple effect sort of in general, in that we see, even in a small town, when one person leads a project, other people, they see this project, they donate to it maybe, or they just hear about it, but they get to see this crowdfunding campaign that launches. They see that it's a local person who's interested in something and is leading this. It could also be, so one thing to clarify, municipalities, nonprofits, they can and are encouraged to lead projects, and they do. But sort of across the board, it really is, it's like, look, people see a local person or a local group leading a project. It then gets funded, and then in a very short time frame, because these crowdfunding campaigns are typically around 1 to 2 months, they then quickly get to see this work actually happening. So it goes from this idea, this crowdfunding campaign, a solicitation of contributions, to then actual implementation. It's not 10 years down the road that somebody, they donated to something, and then much later, yes, there's a great return and a great result, but this is sort of instant gratification, where you get to see this work happening right away. And so somebody sees this, they then think, oh, wow, that worked for those guys. They're not crowdfunding experts, or they don't have like a robust fundraising and development team. And so then other local people decide, I can do that. Or somebody else in a surrounding town seems that one town has started a food scraps recycling program at their transfer station because they saw the crowdfunding campaign, because that campaign, it doubles as fundraising, but also community engagement and awareness building, in that it's, even if someone doesn't donate to it, they see this, they know what's happening. So it's building awareness of sort of this movement and these different projects. And so all the time we'll hear someone reaches out from a surrounding town who said, hey, I saw that food scraps program in New Canaan. We're interested in doing this too. How do we do it? So there's this great ripple effect of, as people are seeing and learning about and contributing to these projects, one, they lead them in the same town, but then also other people see this model and they decide that they could implement that as well. So there's a lot of really neat information sharing and sort of idea sharing, basically so that folks aren't doing everything from scratch. Eric, next slide, please. Okay, so there's not much for me to say about this. It's just a map that we've put together of donations by zip code. So it's showing you basically where folks are donating from. If you see a conspicuous dot where you think your zip code is, obviously go ahead, go to the Patronicity site, take a look at projects. You're free to donate to them. Obviously everybody appreciates the support, but you can see here too that there are spots where there are donations where there aren't projects. So while the donations are largely hyperlocal, people are donating from all over the state. They're seeing this, they're contributing to things happening in nearby or other towns. And if we zoomed out on this even further and looked at this on a national level, there are donations from all across the country. There are even some internationally. So, I mean, much of that is probably if someone's got a brother or a sister, a friend in other states. If folks have parents who have retired to Florida or Arizona, we see big dots in Florida and Arizona. So you know that that's some retirees there who have connections to Connecticut. But folks are seeing this and they're contributing from all over, not just the places where projects take place. Eric, can we go to the next slide? I'll run through some of these very quickly. I think what's left now are just examples of projects that we've supported. So I won't dwell on these. There's a description here. And Eric, I imagine if folks want the slides, you guys can probably share them. But if not, feel free to reach out to me and I can elaborate on any of these projects. In New Haven, Neighborhood Housing Services developed an energy concierge program to help homeowners, tenants, landlords, through the home energy audits, identify solutions, navigate the financing for those things. So it's really a concierge. It's a hand-holding process to help fill in those gaps where HES is there, but then folks are falling through the cracks and not actually moving on to implement. So this is a great program that, speaking to the impact, these guys are now talking with folks in other cities and towns about bringing this model to them too. So it's been neat to see that one project that gets stood up through this then expands to other places. If we go to the next slide, I think that's the Branford Clean Energy Campaign. So this is just an example of folks, local sustainability committee and clean energy task force, who I think through this campaign, they raised like $6,000. We matched about $5,500. And they're doing home energy audits, working with a contractor to help people do this. Again, the audits are free, but this was publicity, advertising, things like that. So just helping to get the word out and to help people understand what solutions are available to them. And then again, similar to the last project, a bit of hand holding. If we go to the next one, In Essex, they installed the town's first EV charger. So they raised $7,000 through crowdfunding. We matched $7,000. Now the town green has its first EV infrastructure. On the next slide was the Multimodal Transit Summit. So this was the third year in a transition to a Zoom-based model, so very different than before. But again, a regional summit that's all about promoting just and sustainable transportation initiatives, and that ties into the Transportation and Climate Initiative as well right now. Moving forward, there's a couple, I think the next two slides are examples of internship programs where local organizations raised money to offer paid stipends for climate interns to get out and educate folks in their communities and in their schools. Eric, we can jump through the next one because it's just another example of that. So there's a climate change exhibit. The Bruce Museum fundraised to create an interactive climate change kiosk at the Seaside Center at the public beach in Greenwich, where folks will actually be able to interact with it and see the impacts of climate change based on various different scenarios. On the next one, it's a downspout planter project, so native pollinators. Oh, okay, I have my slides slightly out of whack here. This is going to be, I think, 3 or 4 examples in a row, different composting initiatives that we've supported. One here to get composters out to people and community groups. In the next one, I think that's the Greenwich, okay, the Sanford food scraps. This is an enclosed model where folks are buying an industrial composter that will actually do it all in-house. So at the town's transfer station, they'll be composting. The next one is a different model of this, but related. In Greenwich at the transfer station, Food Scraps Recycling, where they contract with a hauler. The hauler comes to the transfer station, picks it up, and then brings the food waste either to an anaerobic digester or to an industrial composting facility. And Eric, I think we can probably skip the rest of these slides, right? I don't want to numb people with a million examples of these, but this is just to show that there's a really wide range of different solutions and projects that people have led and that folks have rallied behind to support as well. So it's been a really exciting program, and it's been a lot of fun to see like the creativity and the action from wide-ranging groups throughout the state.
Cool, thanks, Abe. So I have a couple questions, and then I'd love to open this up for to the audience for questions. And Rudy, I'm assuming the best way to take questions is through the chat.
There's a question panel on the side that attendees can type their questions right into. Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. So the first question that I have is for Monica. Now, I know because you and I talked, there's a lot of things that you're doing in terms of creating transparency and working with organizations to really determine the impact of their investment. So if somebody's investing into a bond, how does that relate to, or what does that translate into in terms of environmental impact? Do you want to speak about that a little bit and the tools that you're developing?
Sure. So in addition to doing the second party opinions and the reviews of bonds, and most of the time it's an issuer of a bond that hires us to do that so that they can tell that good story, the sustainability story of their bond. We've also started a separate company now to provide that same type of information as data for the market, so that investors can see whether the issuer has hired us or not. They can see what we can see when we look at bonds. And so we've developed a really robust methodology for evaluating. Everybody's heard lately ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance. But we're looking at municipal bonds with some fairly rigorous lenses, and we're tearing them apart and looking at what are the environmental benefits of these bond financed activities and all different kinds of bonds. We're also looking at social benefits, and we interpret governance as right now we're looking at it in terms of transparency. How transparent are they being? Is this issuer with what these bonds will be used for? We also say how bonds align with United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really it's just kind of like we're trying to give the market information about what do we see when we look at these bonds, So we're just about ready to commercialize that product. We'll do that this year. So it's exciting.
Cool. Matt, so you talked about the sourcing projects not just from established developers, but more from the community and having more of a community-driven approach. Is there a way that you and Abe can team up and allow people to crowdfund solar for towns? Or how far away is that type of innovation?
Yeah, I mean, look, we could do it today. We have a solar offering live on our platform right now. It's in Vermont on a school. But I do think that there is a really unique role for both donation and investment crowdfunding in climate finance, especially for projects that private equity funds may not even think exist. I think that there's something really interesting that we've noticed personally in talking to, hundreds of investors in these projects, which is that people may have no problem donating $100 to a community center, for example. But when they're asked to invest $100 on a solar panel for the community center, there's something that switches in people's brains. It's like they turn into Warren Buffett all of a sudden. Like, what is the risk in this? And these are good questions. You should be asking them. But it's really interesting that you were perfectly fine donating $100, but not investing $100 with a chance for a return as well that you could then donate if you want. So I think that there's a lot of novel experimentation. And Abe, I would love to have the conversation. I think maybe we go back to projects that were funded by you all a year later and say, all right, are you ready to raise 10 times as much or 100 times? Maybe there's a nice way that, the the foundation could backstop or serve as a partial first loss to bring more investors in. So I think there's a really nice way to blend these together, and I think that's one of the exciting challenges we have. We've thought about whether we could have a donate or invest button on our platform. There's some regulatory nuance there, but yeah, I'd love to at least have the conversation and map out areas of collaboration. I think it's definitely possible to do today. Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. I don't have much to add to that other than that I'd love to explore more about this basically and how we can partner on some of these things.
So question for you, Abe. A lot of question/comment. I mean, the 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe more, there was a big trend especially in larger municipalities, for community-based budgeting and really democratizing some of the budgeting decisions and getting really hyper-localized communities involved in what to do with certain types of funds. I don't know how prevalent that is in Connecticut, but I'm curious if you've seen examples of that and if there's a way that that's been integrated or could be integrated with what you're doing with the Community Match Fund.
Yeah, so as far as I know, Hartford has a program like this. I think it's called Hartford Decides, where there's some amount of money that the city has, and there's a local group of folks who are put together to decide how that money should be spent. And I think it's on like small scale capital projects. So I haven't heard about that anywhere else, but I mean, I've certainly spoken with the folks at Hartford Decides, just in that there are ways to, I mean, the way we view the match fund is that it can fund whole projects if, our cap, which is fairly small, $15,000, $30,000. Obviously we can support larger projects, but it dilutes the matching power on our end. It becomes 50 cents on the dollar instead of dollar to the dollar. But with any of those projects, when there are larger ones, if there's a gap that we can meaningfully fill, then the match fund can do that. Or if there's, sort of moving aside from this community-based budgeting for a second, but thinking about some of these larger, longer-term projects, there's one thing that we've looked into is that there are often upfront costs, studies, plans, things like that. I don't know, different models that need to get funded where there's not good funding for those. And we're looking at, well, how can the match fund help to fill those things in to move stuff forward that would otherwise not happen? Specific to community-based budgeting, Hartford is the only one that I know about, but I remember sort of reading different articles and things as well about that, what was once a growing trend, and I don't know where that's gone now, though.
So let me open this up to the group. I see we have one question from Matt. What sort of return on investment do investors typically see when they invest in a Raise Green project?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can go to marketplace.raisegreen.com and see our 3 current offerings, different percentages and different terms. We have one that's 4.5 or 4.25% for 5 years, one that's 5.5% for 12 years, and one that's 5% for 5 years. It's important to note that we're just the intermediary, right? So they're Raise Green projects, and that we do the due diligence to make sure that they are properly disclosed and comply, but we don't manage or create the project. And that's actually what I love the most about it. Yeah, so we're trying to have competitive return rates, but these projects are risky. These are investments. You could lose your principal and other disclosures and things that I have to say. But we do think that it's a unique area of investment that should be studied more closely by investors of all sizes.
Are there other questions from the audience? Well, let's see if there's anything else to come in. Monica, if people are interested in purchasing a green bond, what's the easiest way to track a green bond, and how does somebody go about investing in one?
Well, I think the best thing to do is just let your financial advisor know that that's what you're interested in, and that you would prefer to have that, or you're specifically interested in green bonds. And the problem is the supply is pretty low right now. There's a lot of stuff that could be labeled green that isn't labeled green, because it's just sort of taken a while to catch on here in the U.S. and in the muni market in particular. Many people say, well, everything in the municipal bond market is green, everything is local, everything has a environmental benefit or a social benefit, and that's not 100% true. Some stuff is just kind of general government. So I think it's really a good idea to just be specific about what you want and ask for more. And the more investors ask for green bonds and the more investors support green bonds, the more green bonds there will be.
And so another question for you. I know in Europe there are new climate-based disclosures that are coming out. And what impact do you see those having on the market? And do we think that will drive further transparency in the U.S.?
Is that a question for me or a question for Matt?
I think it's a question for you. I mean, Matt, feel free to answer as well. But,
well, I'll take a crack at it. So the sustainable finance disclosure rules, really kicked in just recently, March 10th, in Europe, and it really is aimed at having investors disclose how the investments that they hold are aligned with, it's called the EU taxonomy. It's sort of the scheme for sustainable finance. It doesn't take social benefits into consideration yet. It's all focused on environmental benefits and alignment with the goals and targets of the Paris Accord. So that is a regulatory regime that's in effect now. And because it is a worldwide market, I think many investments in the US will want to show how they align with the sustainable finance disclosure rules. Just one last thing about that. I think that we're hearing in this new administration an increased focus on disclosure around ESG, around climate risk, and an increased focus on the Paris Accord goals and targets. So I think it's not unreasonable to believe that regulation in the US, as it develops, would likely comport with the regulation in the EU. So someone who's interested in understanding how regulation around this might evolve in the US might spend some time thinking about the EU disclosure rules. Does that help?
And I think that's incredibly precocious. I think the EU is way ahead of us. I will say that the SEC has been very vocal about ESG for quite some time. There's a very interesting speech by one of the SEC directors, Pierce, calling ESG the scarlet letters, because a lot of boards feel a lot of pressure to align with ESG, but a lot of it is just myth making and marketing. So I think that there will be regulation from the SEC soon about ESG, because just like defining what GAAP accounting is, we need to do the same thing for ESG, and the SEC is publicly aware and has made a lot of statements on this. So it's coming fast. And so folks like Monica, I think, will have more business than they know what to do with for quite some time.
So another question from the group, and I'm sorry, I'm not actually able to read the entire screen of the question, but I think somebody was asking what type of security is required for these projects, and I'm assuming that's applying to stuff at Raise Green and presumably at the Sustainable CT Match Fund as well.
I don't know, Matt, do you want me to? I don't have a great answer for this. If security means like what type of certainty there is that the project will happen, I'm sorry, Eric, I'm just not sure how the question would apply to us. If that seems like the relevant way to look at it, then I can answer that though.
Yeah, I mean, do they mean types of securities, or do they mean like subordinated versus secured debt or things like this?
Security against a loan.
That sounds like it's for you, Matt.
Just guarantee or guarantee.
Yeah. So so most of what we finance are actually holding companies that then use the crowdfunded capital to capitalize subsidiary project companies to get super wonky with everyone right at the end. But many of them have like parent guarantees. We're trying to formalize those in a more clear way. Some are subordinated notes, some are not. The beauty of crowdfunding is that, you know, to your point of this whole panel, you know, we can innovate and experiment with a wide variety of security types based on what the issuer actually needs and what would fit best in their capital stack.
The next question that I see, I have a couple questions here about the next Connecticut Green Bank Green Liberty Bond. And I do want to say that while I haven't mentioned that today, there is a coming Liberty Bond that is going to market next Thursday or next week for Earth Day. And there are more details available on a webinar tomorrow evening at 7. Details available on our website or at greenlibertybonds.com. Other questions that have been raised to the group, if you guys have a minute or two. Actually, a great suggestion from Sabina Shelby about using some Eversource public money to match investment here, which I think would be great to bring them into the fold and all of this.
Eric, if I could, a quick shout out to Sabina Shelby. Smart Seed and the Hampshire Foundation are one of the major funders of the Community Match Fund. So it's she and her foundation that are largely making this program possible, along with you guys, so thank you, and the Tremaine Foundation.
I see Alexis Bivens from the Tremaine Foundation was talking about collaborative governance practices in philanthropy. And she was asking about where do you see opportunities for foundations to focus on investments, being that philanthropy is looking for more collaborative governance models, including how to build better finance practices. So I don't know if you have thoughts. Dave?
I don't have much that's it's sort of out of my wheelhouse, right? I don't have much that would be terribly constructive to add there, I don't think.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for philanthropies to directly invest in projects. I know grant making has been the de facto standard of philanthropy, but I think there's something really appealing about, there's something really circular about this type of finance. I mean, if a philanthropy has a mandate to give grants, great, but they also have an endowment, and a lot of them are divesting. They should reinvest in projects that they're giving grants to and use that to amplify the impact of that. And like we said, I mean, if you invest in a project on Raise Green, you may or may not get a return. I mean, of course, all projects could fail, but you can also choose to turn around and donate that to whatever you want. So there's a certain virtuous cycle, reinforcing feedback loop that can be created. And that's what we get really, really excited about.
Yeah, I guess I will add on that end. This is sort of tooting our own horn, right? And this is what I was trying to avoid doing. But it's the idea that, so there's a power structure within philanthropy, right? There's someone who has money that chooses what should get funded. And so it's the people who are out there, right? There are tons of worthy projects to happen. But if that doesn't meet somebody's funding parameters, or if they decide that they don't like it, it doesn't get funded. And so there's a question of who controls the funding, who decides what happens. And so we're, like I said, without congratulating myself and ourselves on a neat program, but there is an idea of saying, well, the people who are doing this work, the people who will be impacted by the work, who will live with whatever the solutions are, that sort of like where philanthropy can step back and say, you know, we want to work with you rather than have you apply to us and decide what we'll give to you and what we'll let you do. I think that's a model that's worth pursuing and worth following, because it is the folks who live in a place, the people who have a lived experience, they're the ones who know what they need. They're the ones who know the solutions that will work for them. And so empowering those people to decide on those solutions, I think is more impactful and more meaningful than having other folks decide on what works for people.
Well, I think that's all that's come in through the questions box, but if there's anything else, feel free to reach out. And I want to thank the panel again. Monica, Matt, Abe, thank you for taking the time and your lunch to speak with us. Very enlightening.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Eric.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to the Green Bank for all that you do. You're a big inspiration to us and many, many other folks like us.
Cool. Thank you. And everybody that's on the line, I invite you to join us for our next webinar Thursday, April 15th at 7 p.m. On Green Liberty Bonds. Thanks.